Everybody, John Brown here, and today we will be discussing Valley of the Kings, a small little kind of light deck builder, almost a filler deck builder. That's something that's a pretty unique idea, because in this game you are actually trying to get rid of cards into your tomb, basically. The Egyptians had this belief about, when you move on to the afterlife, you want to have all this stuff available to you. So the goal of the game is to get the best stuff in your tomb, which provides an interesting challenge because some of the cards you want in your tomb are cards you want for their action. So there's a little bit of you can use a card to buy stuff, you can use a card for its action, or you can entomb a card. So not quite like Glory to Rome in its complexity, because this is still a pretty light game, but interesting choices as to, how often you want to use your card, what you want to use it for, and when you want to get it into your tomb. And there's also a degree of set collection, but not collecting cards in your hands, but collecting cards into your tomb. So even though it's a pretty light, quick game, there's still quite a bit going on. So let's take a quick look at how it plays. We should be able to do this pretty quick, because it's actually a pretty simple game, and then get to what I think about it. Alright, first let's talk about the different sort of cards in the game. First, you have the level 1 cards, as we can see down in the corner, which are also our starter cards. And these different cards are going to make up the starting decks that each player is going to have. So we're going to have a certain number of those cards, and we'll look at how that works. And then we will have the level 2 cards, say level 2 here, and down in the corner. And then we're going to have the level 3 cards. And then, so the players are going to get their starting deck based out of these cards, and every player is going to start with the same starting deck. We're going to shuffle up the level 2 cards and level 3 cards, put the level 3 cards down, put the level 2 cards on top of them, and then deal out the pyramid. So how the pyramid is going to work is we're going to start with 1 card on top, and then these will be revealed, of course, and then we'll have 2 cards below that, and I didn't really shuffle these, but we will do that, but this will allow us to see some different types of cards too. So let's get this card out here. So basically, if this was our starting pyramid, these were the cards that any player could buy during a turn. Now to do so, you'd have to buy from the lowest level. So if I were to buy this card on my turn, then this one would crumble down to fill in the pyramid, this one would crumble down to fill in that space, and then I'd put another card on top. Now if I were to buy this side and this side would crumble down, if I were to buy from the middle here, then the player who bought the card would get to pick which one of these 2 cards would slide down, and then this would slide down and another one come up on top. Now there are cards in the starter deck that allow you to swap cards in the pyramid so that you can potentially buy one that doesn't start out on the bottom, and there's other ways to get cards that potentially are not available right away. Another thing to keep in mind, when you set up the game, you're going to flip 1 card over away from the pyramid, and this is going to be the sacrifice pile. There are going to be cards during the game that allow you to, or force you to, sacrifice cards, and we will put them on top of this pile. We're always going to start with 1, and then there will potentially be more that will just stack on the one before and cover it up. Now the other 2 cards that we're going to have is our tomb, where we will be putting cards, usually at least 1 every round, potentially more, into our tomb like that. Other players can see what we have in our tomb, and this is how we're going to score endgame points, and we'll get to how that works. And a card that tells us about the setup of the game and the player turn. And, it's nice that each player can get one of these, and they're a little helpful. And let's all say hello to Ember while we're at it. I know we've seen Cinder in a few videos. I don't know if we've seen Ember before, but she came to check out this game. Let's look at the player aid to talk about what we do on a turn, and then we'll look at the actual starting deck and some of the other cards and how they work. On a turn, we can, and like many deck builders, we start with 10 cards, and then we draw 5 on our first turn. And then you can use these cards for different things. We can play the card down for their money value. So all of our starting cards right here in the upper left we see are worth 1 coin, basically, that will potentially allow us to, buy cards from this pyramid. So if I want to buy this one at the bottom, it's going to cost me 5 coins. That is the cost in the upper right. And then every time I play it later, it'll be worth 2. So that's important to bear in mind. We can use its ability. So for example, this card allows us to swap 2 cards in the pyramid, or to sacrifice a card in the pyramid, potentially blocking an opponent from getting a card that could be valuable for them. And we'll see why certain cards will become really valuable for people here in a moment. So we can play a card for its coin value in order to buy cards, and our base we can only buy one card. Now there may be things that allow us cards that give us abilities to get more cards, but we can only spend gold to get it. And if we use a card for its gold value here, then we ignore the ability. We can't use a card for both. So we can use cards for their buying power, we can use cards for their ability they give us, or we can entomb cards. And again, we have the ability, and we can do these in any order we want, and we can only use a card for one thing, so we can't use this ability then entomb it. But on our turn, we could take one of our cards and simply put it into our tomb for free. There are cards that might allow us to be able to put more than one into our tomb on a turn, but the base on a turn that we can do for free is one card. Our starting deck. We're going to start with 4 of these cards, and every card in the starter deck, again, is worth 1 gold. At the end of the game, it's worth 1 victory point if they're entombed. So it's basically a point to entomb it, which is not really that valuable because pretty much every other card most of the time will get us more than that, but maybe not. It depends. We'll get to endgame scoring later. But these cards allow us to swap 2 cards in the pyramid or sacrifice a card in the pyramid. So, like I said, when we're looking at the pyramid and we've got these, cards, let's say we really want this top card or one in the middle, then we can play this as an action, swap 2 cards, but we're going to lose that 1 money value. But we have 4 of these, so we have a lot of flexibility with that to start off the game. We start off with 3 urns where we can put the top card of our discard pile onto our deck. So we can look at what we have at the start of a turn, and let's say we really want to buy something that's worth 4, we can use this card to make sure we get one of our more powerful cards for our next turn or something like that. Or potentially play it to put it on top of our deck and then play something that allows us to draw cards. There are all kinds of interesting combinations that come in, especially after we get some of the more powerful cards from out of the pyramid. We start with 2 boxes of food that allow us to sacrifice a card in our hand and entomb a card with a lower cost. So remember, set off to the side, we're going to have this sacrifice deck. So we can get rid of weaker cards and call our deck a little bit, and then also allow us to entomb cards. And this is especially good when we're going for potential sets that we want to get as many of those cards into our tomb as possible. However, remember, if we sacrifice a card or entomb it, we lose it for the rest of the game. And then there's an offering table. This is a rather interesting card. So at the end of a turn, we'll discard all of our cards, whether we use them or not, and draw back up to 5. But this one will allow us basically to block an opponent's action. So if they force us to discard or sacrifice a card, we can show this card and say, hey, I've got this card, and it prevents our opponents from doing, those negative actions to us. Because there can be quite a bit of, doing things to opponents in this game. So I'm not going to go a lot into what all these cards allow us to do, but there's all kinds of different special actions. Sacrifice a card in your hand, take a card that costs up to twice as much as the sacrifice card. So, that allows us to get more cards. This one makes opponents put cards. Each opponent puts a card on top of your discard pile. So our opponents are giving us cards potentially. So here's a way, you use this a lot to end up with a lot of cards in your deck. But there's also cards that allow you to thin your deck. So this card, take a card, here's another card that allows us to get cards. Take a card of the same set as one in your tomb. This can be an exceptionally powerful card. Notice it's a level 3, so it's going to come out later in the game, but basically there are cards that will allow us to draw cards, there are cards that allow us to entomb more cards, to get rid of cards, there are cards that allow us to put cards into our opponent's deck to thin our decks, there are cards that allow us to get a bigger deck. So, I have played this a few times. You can have situations where players have a bunch of cards in their deck. You have situations where players are getting down to just 5 cards, where they're drawing the same 5 cards and comboing off it, buying a card and then getting rid of one, and then having 5 cards again for next turn. So there's all different kinds of things that can happen based on the abilities you want to use. But why are you using those abilities? Well, we're trying to get, basically, the highest value of cards in our tomb so that when we die, we have the best setup. And there's a couple of different ways to do that. Now, if we put one of our starter cards into our tomb, it's just worth 1 point. Every starter card we put in there is worth 1 point. Not that great. Now, there are also these unique cards. So this card down at the bottom says unique, 5 victory points. So if I get one of these into my tomb, it's just straight up worth 5 points. but there are also these sets of cards. So let's, for example, take a look at this statue. So it says statues, and then there's in parentheses it says 7. That means that there are 7 different types of statues in the game. So how these work is, let's say I had this Osiris and then I had this Isis. So basically we're going to square how many I have. So if I have 1, it's not that valuable, but if I have 2 in there, then they're worth 4 points. If I have 3 in there, they're worth 9. If I have 4, they're worth 16. So we want to pay attention to how many cards are available in that set. So the books have 6, and then we're going to square however many we have. The amulets have 5. So we can get these cards and try to collect these sets so that at the end of the game we score big points. However, I can't have 2 of these Osiris. Basically, all of these ones have 2 copies of each one. So I could have 2 of them in there, but I would only be able to score 1 of them. So if I ended up with 2, I'd potentially want to entomb 1 and then use the other one as a card for the rest of the game. So as you can see, that sets up some interesting options. I might have a really powerful card, but it also goes with a set that I have in there. So at which point do I want to keep my cards to use them for their abilities? At which point do I want to use my cards that have potentially a high gold value? So for example, discard a card and draw 3 cards. That's really powerful. But it's also worth 4 gold, which is great for buying more cards. But it also could score us a bunch of points at the end of the game if we have a lot of statues. So when to start entombing cards, when to use them for abilities, when to use them for the money, provide some interesting decisions each round. Alright, so the game ends when basically there are no cards left to draw, there are no cards left in the pyramid, and all players have had the same number of turns. So you'll have a chance maybe to entomb another card or even more cards on your turn if you haven't had equal number of turns, everything ends up whatever. So you might not be able to buy one, but you can still potentially go for more endgame points. It's a relatively quick game, relatively simple game. As far as components, the box isn't bad. It's a relatively cheap game. The card quality isn't fantastic, but it's certainly doable. This is a really interesting little game. It's almost a filler. I don't know if you'd call it that or not, but it's relatively quick, relatively simple, and one of the things I want to say, kind of a small, simple rulebook, but any question I had, the rulebook is laid out pretty well, and then they also have these rule clarifications and card clarifications so that any weird scenarios where say, well wait, does this card work this way or this way, it's in here. I haven't had any questions I wasn't able to quickly find, so thumbs up on that. I could see people potentially not liking this game. I could see people, I think I remember Joel Eddy saying in particular he didn't like this one. I don't know, maybe you think it's too light, it's too, maybe it's a little dry, I don't know. Personally, I like it quite a bit, and it fills a little interesting niche where I don't know if there's anything else like it out there. A really quick, kind of light, almost filler deck builder, and I personally find the theme kind of interesting. Maybe it's not the most exciting, but, trying to entomb yourself with the most things, I think is a pretty unique and interesting theme, too. So, for me, this falls into one of those things that I like quite a bit. A game that's simple to learn, the rules aren't complicated, but provides you with a lot of interesting decisions. I like games that have interesting decisions every turn. And that idea of, do I want to spend money on this? Do I want to use its ability? Or do I want to get them into my tomb as quickly as possible? And because the tomb is open information, you can try to block players. And what's interesting about this, and unlike a game like Praetor that I just reviewed and had very mixed feelings about, in Praetor, if I want to block you from doing something, sometimes there's no benefit or very little benefit for me, but I maybe feel like I have to do it, and that's something I don't like. I've got to stop you from scoring 40 points, but it scores me 3 or 4, or none, and I don't particularly like that. Whereas in this game, if I'm preventing you, maybe I can use a card's ability to get rid of a card. It's only costing me 1 gold, or maybe I'm getting a card for myself that I'd see would be good for you, but I can still use that card, and maybe its benefit is powerful or it's worth a lot of gold. So, and this game also has a bit of meanness. You can force players to discard cards, sacrifice cards, mess around with them. One time I played, I was putting a lot of my starter cards in other people's decks and thinning my deck out. You can play with, trying to get rid of many cards as possible. You can try to entomb as quickly as possible. Or you can end up with really big decks. So for a simple light game, there's actually a decent amount of strategy too, and I think a decent amount of replayability for a relatively inexpensive game. Overall, I'd have to say as far as, you know, interesting theme, interesting decisions for something that's pretty light, I've enjoyed it quite a bit. So overall, maybe this game doesn't offer the silly fun of like a smash up or something like that, but it does offer a quick deck builder with interesting decisions every turn, and that's something I've got to say I like. Alright, thanks a lot for watching, and hopefully we'll talk to you guys again soon. Alright, bye!